Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello, welcome again. This is the third lecture. More or less we would be continuing the discussion we have had the previous class. In the previous class I left you with a so-called vague and a mysterious statement. If you recall, we left with a statement something like literature helps me live 1,000 lives, or you can even replace 1,000 with 1,000,000 lives within a single life. And I asked you to engage with this statement, engage yourselves with this statement and come up with your answers. You can think of it and later you can share me. Maybe in the subsequent classes I am going to share a dedicated forum wherein you can upload your responses. Until then, probably what you can do is you can just jot down some of these points, and when opportunity comes you can share it. All right. Yeah, before we discuss this particular concept, let's quickly do a recap of what we did in the previous class. Again, I said that this class will be filled with stories, and we began with an interesting story of a group of blind people and an elephant, and how each of them, touching only a part of the elephant, tries to define elephant from that narrow particular way, and how unless we learn to forget our individual differences and unite all these experiences together, how it becomes impossible for us to understand the concept of literature in its holistic way. We also learned how that story plays a major role in our philosophical traditions, and we also had another interesting story, the Buddha and layers of consciousness, and how when we say Buddha and the enlightened one, it becomes highly reductivistic, and people do not pay much attention because the concept is quite abstract. On the other hand, if you explain the concept by narrating a short story of a person standing on 7-storied building, and how guests such as love, compassion, sympathy, how they are welcome guests and how you can let them in, and how guests such as anger, hatred, all their unwelcome guests, and how you shut the door behind. So that's the first step towards understanding that state of existence, that state of existence called enlightenment. We said that, and once we know it, we have already taken first step towards becoming the Buddha and things like that. We also understood that there are two routes to knowledge production. One is the conceptual route, the other is the perceptual route, and how perceptual route involves your sensory organs, and how literature takes resort to the perceptual mode, and how it imparts a kind of an experience, because whatever it wants to tell you, it imparts an experience, because experiential learning, as all of us know, it's an everlasting one. It lasts long, unlike a learnt one. It's because you have realized it. Experience is what lends learning a state of realization, right? So literature resorts to this kind of experiential teaching. As part of that, we discussed a couple of interesting observations by French writer and others. Let's continue the discussion in this class as well. And now maybe by the time we complete this class, you will realize how engaging with literature is a kind of a multidimensional engagement. How does literature help me live 1,000 lives within a single life? I was saying that by definition, mortality, we are called mortal beings, right? What does mortality mean? Or how does, I even asked you a very interesting question, can literature make me an immortal one? If we understand the meaning of immortality slightly differently, probably we would know it does make. Now let's discuss how it makes. Before that, let's come to terms with what is mortality. Mortality, in a sense, or philosophically speaking, it has certain limitations. Human beings, we are gifted with certain faculties, we are gifted with certain potentials. Let's say, for instance, we have been gifted with eyes. So with the help of eyes, you can see what is at a certain distance, but there is a limitation to that, right? Let's say if your eyes are sharper, you can see an object that's, let's say, 50 meters ahead. But if you don't have very sharp vision, and if you use glasses like me, you may not be able to see that far, okay? But otherwise, even the person with the sharpest vision has a limitation. Similarly, you can hear a sound that comes from a certain distance, but so your ears have the capacity to listen to sounds made at a certain distance, but not beyond that. Let's say, scientifically speaking, between certain frequencies, your ears or our ears are capable of receiving sounds made between certain frequencies. Something which is beyond or below, we will not be able to hear it at all. Similarly, we have arms, right? If we stretch it, you can hold something that is at a certain distance, but it has a limitation. So that's why we are called mortals. Our abilities, our faculties have certain limitations. Now, look at this. By being born a male, generally I am privy to the experiences of a man or a male, right? By being born in a certain, let's say, a middle class background, I am privy to the experiences of a person who can experience middle class things, not so much of aristocracy or things like that. Now, what happens, that's true for you as well, right? Whatever the background you are born in or born with, you are privy to those experiences alone. When you read literature, or when you and I read literature, what happens? Literature has an extraordinary ability to transpose us into a different realm, and for time being, it has the ability to transform us also. Say, for instance, when you are watching Harry Potter, I'm sure all of you, most of you will have watched Harry Potter, or imagine any movie that you have watched. You tend to identify with certain characters, and at least as long as you are watching that movie, you are living the life of the character that you have associated yourself with. For time being, you have forgotten who you are as an individual. As an individual, you have a certain identity, right? You are born, you have a name, you are born in a particular caste, community, and age, all that. You forget all that and become the other person, at least as long as you watch the movie, or as long as you read a novel, you read a play, something like that. So for time being, literature or the artistic elements have transformed you from being who you are to someone you have identified yourself with. So until that time, you are someone else. So imagine if that is an experience with just watching one movie or reading one book. If you can read 1,000 books, you become 1,000 different characters, don't you? When you read Harry Potter, you become Harry Potter, you start flying with him, you start kicking your broom and go up in the air and all that. When you read some other character, you become that character. So literature has that ability to get under our skin and make us the character that we identify ourselves with, even others, for instance. So that's why I said that we can become immortal, because by mortality, what is confined to us, we can expand, right? Say, as I said earlier, I said that we can only see what is at a certain distance. Now, when you read a work of art, even something that is not there before your eyes, you start, you can see that. Even something which is not in the hearing range of your ears, you can still listen to that. So it extends our limited faculties. In that sense, we become immortal. That's the reason why, though Shakespeare wrote how many 100 years ago, right? You think of it. How many 100 years ago did Shakespeare write? Still we read him. Still we discuss those characters. Greek plays, or the Mahabharata, or the Ramayana, they are still relevant to us. So when we read, we become those characters. That's the reason why I say that literature helps me live 1,000 lives or even 1,000,000 lives, depending on how voracious a reader you are. You can replace 1,000 with million and things like that. Okay, but it helps us live multiple lives within a single life. That's for sure. Listen to what Scott Fitzgerald says. You discover that your longings are universal longings, that you are not lonely and isolated anymore. You belong. That's the message literature gives. Because when you are reading, if you come across a character that's suffering, you suffer along with the person. And you realize that the suffering that you thought yours alone is actually the suffering that many people before you have felt, and many people after you will also feel, right? So you are no longer alone in your moment of suffering. Please remember, these moments of suffering, moments of pain, moments of depression, they are very excruciating. So in these moments, if we can connect with any literary work, if possible connect with actual people around, if that's not possible, at least connect with people that you find in those books. If that connection is made possible, you realize that your suffering is not yours alone. You are part of a community that is suffering together. So it's a kind of a collective journey. And once when you know that your journey is not solitary, there are fellow sufferers, then to a certain extent your pain is alleviated. You feel you belong to a larger community called the entire humanity itself. That's what probably Scott Fitzgerald means, right? Again, you can have a discussion with yourself about what Scott Fitzgerald means, and if you come up with some more ideas and some more meanings, you can as well post them. Continuing our discussion on literature and what it means, here is an interesting shloka from the Ramayana. In our Indian tradition, we call Ramayana the first epic, right? These are our greatest epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. They are our greatest epics. The Ramayana is the first epic. And you all know the story of the Ramayana. How did Ramayana begin? When Valmiki, right, after having bathed in a river, he was coming out. Then he was enchanted by a beautiful sight, a male and a female crowncha bird, in engaging in all merrymaking. They were enjoying together, a couple birds, you can call them. Then all of a sudden, when they were busy playing with themselves and enjoying all the pleasures of life, Valmiki sees an arrow shooting a bird, and the other bird is now grief-stricken. It starts crying. Valmiki is so moved by the entire scene that he curses the hunter who shot the bird to death. And interestingly, he curses in a verse. That means he uses his curse, his curse is in the form of a poem. So his curse is in verse. And commenting on that, that's an extraordinary instance of shoka becoming shloka. And in English, we call it, the transformation of suffering into becoming a song. Suffering transforms itself into becoming a song. That's why, most of the times our literary works are, songs of our suffering, because when we don't know how else to express, we give voice to that suffering, and that voice has the ability to cure the sufferer, at least to lessen it to a certain extent. Shokam shlokatvam. Shoka, suffering, as it ripens, it becomes shloka. Shoka, as it ripens, as it matures, becomes a shloka. Suffering becomes a song. So here we get an insight into how literature is formed, the alchemy of transforming the innards, the inner experiences of our being into immortal literary pieces. And earlier I was also discussing the ability of literature to transform us. We have a very interesting concept again in our Indian philosophical traditions, especially in the context of Shankaracharya. We say Parakaya Pravesha. He had the ability to, Parakaya Pravesha simply means the ability or the faculty to enter into the body of the other. Para, the other, Kaya, Sharira, body, Pravesha, entering into someone else's body. So literature has that ability, it can put us into any body or anybody that we are reading. Again, pun is intended on anybody or anybody. It has the ability to put us into that body, make us experience the joys of that body, the pleasures of that body, the suffering of that body, all the fleeting moments of life you experience and then you come back, right? That's why a renowned, young adult fiction writer, Mallory Blackman, says that reading literature is an exercise in empathy. When you are empathetic, what do we call? We have an interesting phrase in English, right? To put yourself in someone else's shoes. What does it mean? It simply means that to empathize with the person, to understand their point of view from, from their perspective, try to understand things from their perspective, something like that. And one of the great Kannada poets, playwright, Puthi Narasimhachar, he says that literature has the ability to free us from our self-centeredness. He calls it Swakendra Mukti. What does Swakendra Mukti mean? By definition, human beings, that means all of us, we are at least self-centered, if not selfish, at least self-centered, right? When we are reading literature, literature helps us shift ourselves from self-centered to the other-centered, because as long as we are reading or as long as we are watching, if it's a film or a movie, we become the other person. We have already discussed that, right? So it's an extraordinary feat. It's an extraordinary spiritual achievement, right? If you know what I'm talking, it's an extraordinary spiritual achievement. So if literature can help us achieve this Parakaya Pravesha, what more do we need than that, isn't it? It makes us forget who we are, become the other person, and after that we become ourselves again. We become ourselves again. That's why we can say that, literature entails with it a kind of a spatio-temporal journey. Well, I try to minimize the use of jargon in this course, but once in a while let me use this jargon. Jargon is a specialized word related to a particular field. Nothing wrong in knowing, making ourselves familiar with a couple of jargons at least bear with me please. Spatio-temporal, space, time, voyage. When you read a work written 300 years ago, you travel back in space, and when you read sci-fi novels set 100 years from now, you travel in future, right? So you are at this moment, you are living in this place. When you are reading a work of an African writer, you transpose yourself from Indian subcontinent to the African continent, or when you are reading a Japanese work, you travel there. When you're reading a Latin American work, you travel there. Look how many journeys it entails, right? It is said in the case of digital revolution, it is said that the click of a mouse changes geography into history. It's a very well-known statement, the digital revolution. In the case of digital revolution, it says that, at the click of a mouse, you turn geography into history. What do we mean by that? Again, a very interesting thing. I want you to think about all these things. The concept of geography, as this place different from that place, becomes a thing of past. It becomes a thing of history, because by sitting here in India, you can get to know what is happening in Africa, what is happening in Europe, what is happening in the Americas, things like that. Similarly, when you read a work of art written by people belonging to different regions, because literature is, region specific to a certain extent. It is rooted in the local but appeals to the universal. So in that sense, literature is glocal. It's a portmanteau term. A portmanteau term, is a combination of two separate words to become a single word, global and local. So literature is glocal while being rooted in the local in its appeal and spirit. It is universal. So you get to travel places while sitting in your room in India. You get to visit all those different places, right? That's why it entails with you a spatio-temporal voyage. All right. Now, why is literature relevant today? Now I want to ask this with a particular relevance to, let me borrow from Rabindranath Tagore. He is our first Nobel laureate, and he says a very interesting stuff. He says, in times of darkness and despair, it's to song that one must turn for light. Isn't it? How beautiful. In times of darkness and despair, it's to song that one must turn for light. Literature has that ability to offer light in times of darkness. It has always been the case in history, right? If a civilization is down, here comes a work that can uplift the entire civilization. That's the capacity to inspire. That's why such works become cult classics. They become sometimes even epics, because they have the ability to inspire an entire generation. Why an entire generation? An entire community, even after many generations. If you read the Ramayana, if you read the Mahabharata, if you even read the Bhagavad Gita, though they were written, thousands of years ago, at least a couple of thousands of years ago, even to this day when you read, they have the ability to uplift us. They can inspire us, right? So always songs have accompanied us and have provided light. They have acted as a beacon of light. This is Tagore for us. And when people ask why should we read literature at all, because remember, we live in a utilitarian world where everything has to have a purpose, a practical purpose. So people keep asking, what is the purpose of literature? Because behind these questions is a kind of an apparent comparison. A doctor has an obvious purpose. He or she cures people. An engineer, if it's a civil engineer, he or she constructs a building. If it's other engineer, they do some particular work. What does a writer do, or what does a reader do? What is the purpose at all? So here is a beautiful quote from a remarkable movie called Dead Poets Society. We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of human race. Remember, earlier we said that literature is a significant expression of humanity. We belong to human race, and therefore we read it to know about fellow beings. And the human race is filled with passion. And medicine, law, business, engineering, all these are noble pursuits, no doubt. They are necessary to sustain our life because they earn our bread. But literature, poetry, music, love, beauty, romance, these are what we stay alive for, isn't it? Because they add zinc to life, they add beauty to life, they add the necessary things to make our life worth living. This is what we stay alive for. What more use do we need than that? Think of these things, and then of course we forget that literature does not have any purpose, because it adds that great ingredient to life. What is that ingredient? It makes our life worth living. What is more important than that, right? And if you are still not convinced, let me take you on to a couple of benefits, right? These are for somebody who is still not convinced that literature does not really help us in any way. When you read the best of fiction, the best of drama, the best of poetry, it enhances our reading, thinking, writing and discussing abilities, isn't it? Reading also fosters our analytical and cognitive abilities, but it does not, announce, literature does not announce, you read me, I am going to do all these things for you. It does it very silently. In that sense, it's a silent achiever. When you do it automatically, you see, maybe you continuously read for about a year, read randomly, read widely, read wildly, then see after a year, automatically your reasoning capacity is increased, your analytical skills are almost doubled. And the way you construct sentences, the way you think, it's almost expanded. You will experience all these things. Literature also instills a sense of awe in us, a sense of wonder in us, something that happens when you look at nature. In fact, you have heard of this song, right? What is this life full of care? There is no time to stand and stare. When you look at nature, it instills in us a sense of wonder. Literature also does that, a sense of wonder. And when you read a work of art, when you are down, when your spirit is down, it uplifts you. It offers you a glimmer of hope. It gives you a spirit of courage. It takes you on to different dimensions of language. It also develops in us finer sensibilities towards fostering our relationships. After reading a work of art, you realize how relationships are important, because at the end of the day, life is fleeting. In this fleeting moment, if there is something that can add worth, something that can act as an anchor, then it's relationships. Relationships, we realize the importance of relationships all the more when we engage ourselves with literature. An extraordinary benefit, isn't it? And then it inspires our mind. When you read the beautiful expressions, you're inspired. In fact, I still remember, I had a friend in college. He always had, a frame. He had made there's a lovely poem by Rudyard Kipling called If. You can please search, you can ask your Google will get that poem for you. If you read it, you realize at once how inspiring the poem can be. Or even if you read Maya Angelou's poems, or anybody's poems for that matter, you realize how it lends support, how it acts as an anchor to your life. So these are some so-called external benefits to us. But the primary benefit of reading is, that's the primary benefit of literature as well. The primary benefit of literature is to engage your life in a meaningful way, all the while enjoying it. You enjoy it and also in the process get engaged with it. What better use of literature? What better, what more relevance do you need than that, right? Keep thinking on these things. In the next class, let's continue the discussion. Thank you.